Hello, mental workers, and welcome back to the Mental Work Podcast for early career psychologists. I'm very excited today because we are going to be talking about whether the undergraduate psychology degree is fit for purpose. What caused me to think about this topic was going through the undergrad psych degree, so 3 years plus 1 year's honours, and then being thrust into the workplace and kind of not having the skills needed to thrive. I kind of floundered and it was a big flop actually. And I wanted to talk with somebody else who had also gone through the psych degree and could comment on how much it has overlapped with where they are now and whether they think there's scope for improvement. So who I have here with me is Brian Cheng. Say hi, Brian.
Hello, everyone.
Brian is a psychologist with 15 years experience across various settings, including crisis helplines, disability, headspace, child services, and he's now a school psychologist. Does that sum it up about right?
Yeah, it's weird to hear it back at me like that. But yeah, that's all the bits and pieces that I've done over the years.
Yeah. And so what we're going to cover in this episode is we're going to talk through Brian's experience of going through the undergrad and then talking about his subsequent experience. So Brian did the 4+2 pathway, which is 4 years uni, and then around about 2 years. I'll be interested to hear how long it actually took you. Sometimes it takes people more. Around about 2 years, intensive workplace experience where they learn all the competencies required to become a psychologist. And I'm interested to hear how this has played out in his current role. We'll also be going through what exactly the undergrad degree is supposed to provide us with, and then what skills are actually needed to be a psychologist in the day-to-day world. So could we just start off, I guess, with your experiences going through the undergrad? What did that look like for you? Take us back.
Yeah, it's a trip down memory lane. Well, I think to go right back, I think like psych was never the end goal for me. I think it was never like a burning passion, like I want to be a psychologist, but like I was really guided by my mum who kind of saw that I was analytical and was reasonably kind of empathic with people and thought that it was a good profession to go down. So on that basis, that's kind of how I chose it. What was my experience like? I mean, obviously I was interested in the topics and first year psych and all the great lectures about, attraction and social psychology. So I think I really had that passion for the topic and all those interesting areas. I mean, as it progressed, I feel like there are a lot of different topics, right? So you had those kind of more social side of things, but then you had the really hardcore neuropsych bits with all the brain stuff, which I found really difficult and really needed my study group.
Yes.
Lots of late nights figuring out visual perception and stuff.
Yep.
And then the stats side, I think I felt challenging. I felt was really challenging too, because it was just, a cruel form of maths. And then the honours year, I think felt really challenging, obviously, because it's a massive undertaking. It's a long-term project with a huge deadline. So I guess, to sum up, I felt like it was really interesting. Yeah, really quite challenging, I guess, intellectually. And also I was, I think, just really enjoying my uni life a little bit too much. So trying to balance the social life and also
of course
book work. On reflection, there were things that I would do differently if I was to redesign the psych degree for sure.
Yeah, because I'm really interested with honours year. A lot of people give that feedback that it's a really challenging year. And at the end of my honours year, I was completely exhausted. I'd been working so hard, and that's kind of a common experience. So tell us where you went to after honours.
So I had a really hard time, but I got through, ended up getting like second class, first grade or something.
Yeah,
and
me
then,
too.
Yeah, cool. I'm just trying to think what was my mindset. I think I was just wanting to get into the workplace. And I think, again, my mum was awesomely guiding for me. And she said I should just get my teeth stuck in and just jump to the trenches. So I got a job at DOCS or FACS, which is the statutory child protection service in New South Wales. And yeah, just did that for 2 or 3 years. And that was, well, first of all, it's kind of an absurd prospect, right? You throw a 21-year-old into child protection, investigating child abuse, going to people's houses, doing removals, going to court, writing affidavits. It's brutal and it's wild.
Yeah, it's a big contrast because during the undergrad, it's kind of going from writing this report on a research question and analysing this lab data or looking at social group norms to what you just described. It sounds pretty hardcore. How did you cope with that?
I mean, I think I probably had a slightly delusional belief in myself that maybe I was I could do it, and maybe that's because when I got into it, that's just what I need to do to survive, right?
It's it sounds like a good coping strategy.
Yeah, yeah, it's a functional delusion. But I think also at that time, and this probably ties into my overall sense of myself and my mental health, I felt like that I could just deal with it, right? I could do these things, I could witness these things, and I thought that I was immune, that I could just manage it. And I think that kind of got me through for the first couple of years. After that, and certainly in the past 5-10 years, I've been much more aware of vicarious trauma. And I think also as I've become a more connected psychologist, I think I've allowed myself to be affected by the work more. Whereas perhaps in those early years, I was maybe less emotionally connected to the work. And subsequently, I was probably not as good a clinician, but I think I was just trying to play the role.
I mean, that makes sense to me. I think it's quite common as well. You just kind of put this barrier between you and the client. It's an emotionally protective barrier. So there's the positive there that you might not get as much as the vicarious trauma if there's a wall between you. But then, like you say, there might be consequences. Perhaps you aren't as attuned to the client as you could be, or emotionally responsive. Not saying that you weren't these things.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And also, I think in that child protection context, it's that much harder to be really emotionally in tune because on the one hand, you've got that kind of statutory power, but then you're also expected to be this empathic, therapist as well, which is really like when you think about what makes therapy work, is it's never going to work.
But it'd be almost impossible. I don't know. I do remember back to my, probably a few years ago when I was a provisional psych, and there was this one person, and I bet this is like universal experience. And I was like, I wish I could just, bundle them up and take them away from their home, and then they would be safe and I could keep them here and it'd be all good sort of thing. And I don't know, I'm willing to bet that in child protection, there are some things that you see that you're just like, wow, I wish I could just whisk them away.
Yeah. And look, that's the instinct, right? That's our instinct for protecting vulnerable people. But I think that also plays into that more, I say naive, but I guess a less experienced viewpoint of the world. I think this is where maybe social work and counselling engenders a better perception of the nuances and the grey areas. Yeah. And when you've got a bit more of that systemic view, I think you're more willing to be able to sit with the heavy stuff and maybe allow some situations to play out because you know that it might be for the best in the end. Like there's less of that immediate knee-jerk reaction of, I want to save them or I want to get them out of there.
Yeah, exactly. So this kind of leads us into an interesting area, which is you're kind of alluding to the idea that perhaps the undergraduate degree doesn't focus on the systemic kind of perception of the world, whereas social work and perhaps other degrees do. So let's just, I guess, agree on what is the focus of the psych degree. So I've written down in my notes that I think the psych degree is weighted towards research and kind of a medical model of how we see people. So this person has a disease, it's kind of individual in them, it's their individual psychopathology. And so we treat the individual and then the disease will go away. What's your perception?
It's fascinating. I think, look, at the beginning, I really kind of, I subscribe to that because, I mean, that's what you're taught, right? But I think, and particularly in this more kind of contemporary space, hopefully that we're moving towards in terms of psychology and social justice and looking at the systemic contributions to individual mental illness, that's very much where my head's at. And really thinking about power dynamics and privilege and how those become really important parts of the formulation. And I think, again, that makes it a more difficult prospect because sometimes those elements are less in the control of the person and less in control of the counselling context.
Yeah.
But I think it's so necessary. And then that's when, our jobs as psychologists become much more political. Yeah, we have to advocate more. We have to fight against systems. I work in a school, so looking at, challenging existing power dynamics and challenging principles and suspension practices and all those things. So in that sense, the work becomes more complex, but it can make it that much more rewarding as well.
Yeah, because what I'm hearing then is, so you're a psychologist with 15 years experience. And what I'm hearing is that your role involves thinking about these systemic issues every day. So thinking about power and privilege and social justice. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't think about this when I first signed up to working in schools, but a school is like a mini world, like a mini ecosystem. So you've got the power structures, you've got the discipline, and then you've got all those kind of different social dynamics. And then each kind of year group has its own vibe. So it surprises me every day just how much this work is systemic. And yeah, I just can't divorce it from that thinking. And again, in that way, it can be more frustrating because, obviously in private practice or in one-on-ones, you have a more closed loop. But also, I think when you're operating in that greater ecosystem, you're going to be creating hopefully a bigger impact. And for the students, I guess you're coaching them and supporting them in a more real environment. So there's, I guess, hopefully more in situ change.
Yeah, because it sounds kind of inescapable for a modern psychologist to be thinking about these issues. Whereas I would argue that the undergrad psych degree, well, I think it's pretty clear from looking at the unit descriptions and from having experienced it ourselves. Like, I don't remember ever having a lecture on, I guess, systemic issues or how to think about the world in that way, or I guess power structures or racism or all these things. What about you?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I think maybe it surprised me that the first time I picked up like Carl Rogers' book, I mean, he's not obviously so much about systemic stuff, but I guess the general vibe of what you're saying, there's a lot that's missed in that undergrad degree. And I think it's a lot shaped by the lecturers and I guess what they're into. But really, like a lot of the foundational knowledge and kind of foundational texts that I treasure now really came through, maybe my internship, or, I was lucky to have really great mentors and they kind of put me onto that stuff. So it feels like, well, for me anyway, that those basic building blocks or foundational thought patterns and texts, weren't presented to me while I was at uni.
So do we think that they need to be? Should they actually be in there, that we have these building blocks?
I mean, it's an interesting question because, I mean, I think it comes down to what kind of psychologist you want to be, how you want to practice. Because, I mean, look, I don't think of myself as a particularly textbook psychologist. Like, I feel like more of a hybrid social worker. So for me, I think maybe for me, the psych degree was not a good fit. But I think for someone that maybe wants to work in a more specific context, maybe in inpatient or in the hospital system, or, specializing in private practice, then I think it is a really good fit, or if they want to be a researcher. But I think if you want to go into those other directions, then doing those other things, finding great mentors, being part of different organizations or, Facebook groups to kind of build that knowledge, I think is really necessary.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So I guess what I'm hearing from you is that the psych degree is fit for purpose for a specific type of person who wants to be a specific type of psychologist.
Yeah, I think so. Look, it's one of those things, right? Is like all of us, like, how do we reflect and interrogate the narrative of our lives? Like, I mean, I could argue that if I didn't do the psych degree and I didn't have like a horrific 4+2 experience that I almost didn't survive, okay, would I be the clinician I am today? No. And how much different would I be if I had done a social work degree to begin with? So there is always that kind of,
of course. But do you think that things could have been made a bit easier? Like, do you ever remember reflecting back on maybe a horrific 4+2 experience and you're like, damn, I wish somebody had taught me this in uni?
Yeah, 4+2. So
you're like, no, I've forgotten that phase of my life. Just blocked it out.
That's repressed memories. I think because in my 4+2, I was at the Cerebral Palsy Alliance doing family therapy type stuff. And then I was at Headspace as well to finish it off. I think, just learning more about even just older forms of or older modalities, like a lot of the relational stuff, the more kind of psychodynamically informed stuff. That's stuff that I ended up finding the most useful and that resonated the most with me. I think, look, a lot of the kind of the standard stuff, the CBT and a lot of that more standard stuff, that came in handy. That was really useful.
Yeah, totally.
But that kind of greater, maybe the wider sense of those modalities and the history of psych and the learned practice of those things. I didn't feel like I had as much in my undergrad. But also, I mean, again, I compare it to the social work degree, and I have a lot of friends that are social workers. They seem to have a better sense of reflection and insight and more of that stuff around, how is this interaction or how is this client making you feel, and then using that. So I think maybe the social work degree builds better emotional intelligence potentially.
It's really interesting you say that, because literally as we were talking, I was kind of answering my own question, and I was like, I wish that there was more taught about transference and countertransference in the degree. And I think you're kind of echoing that, in that you wish that there was more insight into how we are as people comes into interaction with the work. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly right. And I guess that makes sense with, the label of psychology as, a soft science. There's maybe less of a tendency to introspect and see the nuances and the kind of the airy-fairy side of the work. And I guess one of the things that I found really useful is going to therapy myself. That's really helped, obviously, survive my 4+2 and survive being a psychologist. But also it helped me professionally to know what it's like to be in the seat and to figure out what works. There's plenty of things that my therapist told me, which I was like, oh, I'm never going to say that to my to my client ever again. But I think it's also reflecting, look, the fact that a psychologist or any kind of therapeutic role it's not a normal job. It's vicariously traumatic, and our hearts and our souls are our key tools for our job. So to keep that in check and to keep those tools tuned up with therapy and with, self-care and all those things, that's, I guess, something that was never really mentioned to me in psychology as much.
What I'm hearing you say with the social work degree is that, one, it has more a capacity to build emotional intelligence, but also it seems to allow more exploration. Like, they have way more practical components than the undergrad psychology degree does, which has either zero or encourages their undergrads to get some volunteer experience. And so, how are we supposed to know what we like and what kind of psychologist we want to be if we're not actually given that opportunity to explore?
Yeah, it's a striking point. I was looking back on my degree and the current units involved. I think there's something called a capstone unit, which is in the 4th year, and that involves reflection on, I guess, what kind of psychologist you want to become.
Oh wow!
I was very impressed. Reflection. Kind of trying to bring all the elements of your knowledge together into a meaningful whole. And then you also get 32 hours of a work placement there. I mean,
that's amazing. Which university is that?
That was at Macquarie Uni in Sydney.
Wow.
32 hours is less than a week.
Yeah, nothing, but
compared to social work. But the fact that that's there is comforting, and maybe some of the feedback over the years has contributed to the development of that unit. So I think it's getting there, and it's getting better bit by bit. But at its core, I think that lack of practical experience really does that early cohort a disservice, because you end up with a lot of book knowledge and a lot of theories. But then I think, like you felt and I felt, once you're thrown in the deep end into a job, then you just don't have that experience.
No, and I've gotten feedback about that as well. So I've worked with people who have been released from prison, for example, and they've complimented me on the fact that I didn't seem to be reading out of a textbook, that I actually wanted to connect with them as a real human. And I felt that was nice, but also sad that they, throughout their whole prison experience, that they hadn't actually had somebody who could connect with them as a person, rather than just sound like they're reading from a CBT textbook.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the problem is when you expose a cohort to that much knowledge and they're not giving that exposure. And also the kind of messaging you're giving to a cohort of people is like, okay, we're going to assess you and test you on all these things and take you through a really rigorous process. I think that, well, certainly in me, that encouraged or fostered just a huge sense of perfectionism. And
so true.
Yeah. I mean, I'm quite a neurotic person to begin with.
Aren't we all?
Yeah. Psychologist.
I didn't mean to disparage you. It's just that on this podcast before, I've kind of either said, look, you're a self-sacrifice, you're a perfectionist as a psychologist, or both. So it seems to be very common schemas that we have. Yeah,
totally. So I think that doesn't help with our core schemas to begin with. And particularly the 4+2. I think really set me up to, just to really struggle with that perfectionism. And it's taken me, how long? I've been registered, 6 years? Only in the past probably 3 years am I really starting to kind of come back into my own skin and kind of be able to practice from myself, because I think for so long I was still in that 4+2 mindset, having to get the intervention, get the formulation down, get the plan going. And I think that sense of urgency and moving away from the therapeutic relationship, I think that made me a worse therapist. I think slowly I'm being able to practice more from my soul and from the truer part of myself. It makes the work harder because you're putting more of yourself into the work. But I think, and I know that that's what makes good therapy.
Yeah, because I'm aware that, you've spent 15 years in this field. Something that I've brought up on the podcast before is one of the aims of what I'm doing is to help people who want to stay in our field continue to stay in the field. We have an alarming rate of burnout. And sometimes when people experience that burnout in their early years, they actually leave the profession. And so I'm looking at you and I'm like, wow, there's somebody here with 15 years experience. They know what it takes to actually survive in this profession. And you're saying, look, it is really important to know yourself, to get that therapy, to realize that you are part of the toolkit of being a psychologist. Can you just give us some more insights into what it takes to kind of survive this long?
That's assuming I'm like surviving or like thriving at all.
It is an assumption, but give us some hope here.
That's an interesting question. I think, look, finding great mentors, and I know that's hard to do. I've been really lucky because I've had 2 or 3 like older mentors that I think have been really generous with me and really shaped me. So I think, I guess maybe the advice there is keep looking for a mentor until you find one that's really going to nurture you. Because I think there'll probably be a lot of people out there that have had not great experiences of supervision and mentoring. But yeah, again, I think that it's so important. It's like what early parenting does. I think early mentoring in early career is pivotal, setting those kind of work schemas and making those early years rich and exciting and beautiful. What else? I think, look, I've changed jobs around like a reasonable amount. So I think that's helped me figure out what's going to work for me. I still don't exactly know like what's the best role for me. I guess the other thing is, in a more kind of practical standpoint, is thinking about the nuts and bolts of the job and whether they're going to fit in with your life. So, at the moment I work in schools, which is really good because I have a young family. So I guess finding those variables that fit with your life, but also I guess having a sense of maybe taking a step back, obviously from face-to-face work. I think I've been in front-facing roles for about enough. So I think my next role will probably be something in a supervision space or a consulting space or something like that. That's a pretty common practice amongst, my peers and other psychologists I know.
Is that just to manage the emotional labor of the role? Do you feel like you could be a more effective face-to-face clinician if you took some time away, or is that for another reason?
I think it's both. I think once you've done that early career in the trenches bit, I think you start to get some ideas about what you want to be different. So I think there's a natural shift towards a more systemic based role. And then probably embedded within that is that sense of just having that respite. And I guess once you're away from the front facing roles, and if you start to miss it, then you'll know that that's what you're meant to do. I remember one of my mentors, he was super experienced. He kind of managed the child and adolescent mental health service across Sydney. And when he was with me at Headspace, he ended up just doing like just the basic therapy or the intake work, because he just really missed the work. So I think it's a good test of where your passion really is as well, to kind of step away and then come back.
I guess something else that I heard you emphasize was really speaking to that relational aspect, which we might not get taught during the undergrad degree, about how important it is. I just was interested in hearing from you, like, how important is it, do you think, I guess, who we are as humans, and to bring that into the therapy space?
Yeah, this is something that I've only really learned in the past 5 or 10 years. If you think about, the common factors pie chart, where, what is it? 30 to 40% is the therapeutic relationship.
Yep.
15% is the modality. 15% is hope. And then there's extra therapeutic factors.
Yeah.
That relationship is so massive. And I think the earlier or the more you can learn to bring that into the therapy room, the more, the better clinician you'll be. And also I think the more sustainable your practice will be, because you'll be, practicing from the heart. I guess it's challenging. And I've had kids recently. And so that's kind of been the biggest shaper of my kind of relational stance in the therapy room. And that makes it more challenging, because when I see clients or students, I think of, that my child could be in that situation one day, and how do I want to approach them in that way? So it makes it more personal in some sense, but I think it means that you can be more effective and you can start to use those relational aspects to better effect in the room. Yeah, I guess that sense of using the relationship is, I feel like it's kind of like the more, not quite magical, but the mysterious aspect of therapy. Yeah. Because you're not just, doing a worksheet and, doing exposures and stuff like that. It really is more dynamic, and you're having to attend to those nuances much more. So yeah, it's something that I still struggle with. I'm learning how to do the dance of that relational work, but I feel like it is really satisfying. And I think, it is really effective.
Awesome. Brian, I feel like we're kind of coming towards the end of this episode, but I just wanted to go back then and start with the original question of, is the undergrad degree fit for this profession? What have we learned?
I guess the question is, it depends where you want to go with your profession. It can really fit well if you want to move towards research or towards a more kind of textbook clinical psych pathway, or if you want to get to a particular place. So I know that to be a psychologist in New South Wales, to be a school psychologist in New South Wales, you need to be a psychologist. Whereas, in the Catholic system, you can be a social worker or a counsellor. And I know that in the hospital system, you need to be a clin psych to access certain roles. So I think if there are those specific pathways or particular places you want to go, then great. If your interests are more diverse, then I think being able to explore those areas of knowledge and being able to expose yourself to those areas you're interested in is really important, so that you don't get thrown in the deep end in your first job.
So if you have kind of a social justice or social work kind of leaning, which it sounds like you have passions in these areas, it sounds like volunteer or paid work that really gets you in front of the people who you're interested in or working from that perspective would be helpful.
Definitely. Yeah. Those kind of early experiences when I think I volunteered at a brain rehab center. And, I worked at Lifeline as well. Yeah. Those are experiences I still reflect on and I still kind of use as clinical examples. And just that feeling, the feeling of connection, the feeling of sitting with vulnerability, and just, seeing the beauty of the human narrative or the human personality. They've been really kind of foundational experiences.
Awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much for telling us about your experience. It's been really lovely to chat with you. Is there any final takeaway that you want to leave listeners with?
I mean, along the lines of what we've been saying, I think training to be a psychologist is kind of training to be a human, right? We have a unique role with a unique kind of skill set. So, I mean, I love food and music and narrative and podcasts and all these things. Those things are still really impactful in my work and end up being as useful as PD sessions sometimes. So exploring what you love as a human is going to make you a great therapist as well.
I completely agree, and thank you for that. I was rewarded the other day for knowing what Adventure Time was with a young person, and so I feel very validated hearing you say that.
Oh, it's the best. Yeah. It's that feeling when a teenager their face lights up because you like the same culture as them. It's gold.
Yeah, I'm in. I'm the cool person. Yeah. Great. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you so much again, Brian. And thank you, listeners, for listening. If you have any feedback on this episode or any questions, please send me an email at mentalworkpodcast@gmail.com. And until our next episode, take care and we'll catch you then. Bye.